Coverage today is brought to you by the members of the DL 500 Club. For just $10 a month, you get exclusive content and send me to all the races. Okay, so obviously a bunch of news broke about last evening and into this morning, and we just got to talk about it. Now, I'm going to freely admit right now that this is a bit of a blind spot for me. You know, while I have a lot of contacts in the IndyCar paddock, I can talk to a lot of different people. One of the kind of spots that I don't have a lot of contacts or necessarily a lot of like people's phone numbers are team owners. So a lot of the information that you're going to hear comes from other folks working in the paddock, and I will credit them as we talk about them in this video. But yeah, a lot of news broke yesterday, and a lot of team owners are saying a lot of things, and some of them are very, very strongly right now against what and how Roger Penske and Penske Entertainment are running IndyCar. Now, that doesn't apply to all the team owners. In fact, the most loud, vocal, and right now kind of a lone wolf in this is Michael Andretti. And all of this kind of stemmed from an article that was written yesterday by Nathan Brown in the Indy Star. There was a kind of a private meeting of reporters with Michael, and he said a whole lot of different things. And essentially, the teams, and this was confirmed later by Marshall Pruitt of Racer.com, that the teams are not happy with the current idea of the charters. The charters, at least as Penske proposed them, would cost the teams $1 million a year for each of their cars. And that was soundly rejected by the team owners, like right off of the bat, like instantly rejected. So obviously the charter talks have not gone very far at all. The teams want the charters because there's a lot of uncertainty in IndyCar right now. Yes, there are a lot of positives. Like, yes, objectively the TV numbers are up. Merchandise sales, as they've said a couple of times, are up. There's some cool new events. Like, there are good things. Like, we're not saying there's not good things, but you know, if you're a business person in this industry right this minute, you are looking at the future, and there are some question marks. I think that is worth saying. I think that's objective fact at this point, and that's proven by many of the team owners bringing these concerns to Penske Entertainment. Specifically, the quote that I think everybody kind of has sensationalized, and rightly so, is that Michael Andretti called for Roger Penske, or has called for him to sell the series, at least part of it in some way. Specifically, Nathan Brown's article, which you can read in the description. I highly suggest you go click on it because it's a great piece of journalism. Essentially says one of the reporters who was on scene asked Michael about Penske being in a tough spot. Is he in a tough position? To which Michael quoted, and I'm going to read a direct quote from the article. Michael said, then sell the series. There's people out there willing to do it. I think there's a lot of people on the sidelines thinking this is a diamond in the rough if you do it right, but what you need is big money to get it to that level, and if he's not willing to do it, I think you should step aside and let someone else buy it. He also suggested later in the article that maybe Penske should sell part of the series and continue to have the majority ownership, but sell the rest of it to someone else to generate some capital. You know, I know that Roger Penske does not want to, share this with anybody. This is his series. This is his speedway. He doesn't want to share that with anybody. So the suggestion, which makes sense, and Michael made it for a reason, that maybe you sell the series and keep the speedway or something like that, or something to that effect, I should say. Makes sense on paper. It's not something Roger Penske and co. are willing to compromise on this at this moment. But the fact that a team owner, because there's been so much negativity over this offseason. I think most people would say that, who are thinking rationally about everything that's going on in IndyCar racing. But I think a lot of the IndyCar defense force out there has been like, well, the team owners are still happy, right? Well, now we have at least one team owner that is very, very publicly unhappy. And, how many of the team owners share that opinion? We'll have to wait and see. Marshall Pruitt's article, which is also linked in the description, you should also absolutely read, talked about specifically the fact that the team owners tried to do this or are still trying to do this behind closed doors. The fact that Michael has come out publicly, I think, says something pretty significant. And, without going too far into the speculation category, I will say this. Michael has had a serious rejection from Formula One. He's got a serious budget in Formula One. At what point do you, Michael Andretti, and you, Dan Tauris, who have spent so much money trying to get to Formula One, say there's a perfectly good series that we could buy or maybe invest in and try to make it an F1 competitor? I mean, if you felt rejected by a series, maybe you feel that way. And maybe this article, I kind of got that impression a little bit, is a suggestion of sorts that Michael Andretti is kind of raising his hand and saying, hey, I'd like to buy in. I'd like to take an opportunity. I don't know. That's just me reading between the lines on that one. He had a couple of interesting suggestions, too, because I think that's kind of the other way I got the impression is that Michael kind of came in this article and said, I've got ideas, right? Specifically mentioning something that I've mentioned before is that IndyCar should adopt a new chassis which would be compatible with IMSA GTP engines to try to get more than 3 manufacturers involved. GM and Honda, through their Acura brand, are already involved in IMSA. You could keep those manufacturers and potentially expand to like Porsche and Lamborghini and Alpine and any of the other companies that are coming into IMSA GTP racing. It makes a lot of sense if you were to adopt those regulations. And the other thing that I just thought was kind of interesting and is, I think, a point that is well taken is that Michael talked about the post-race celebrations kind of feeling like an SCCA race. I mean, when you turn on an F1 race, and again, I think Mark Miles has a really good point that he's made in a couple of different statements that I think IndyCar is unfairly compared to, say, Formula One or NASCAR because they do have a lot more money. But I think a fair comparison of IndyCar is to like World Endurance Championship or IMSA. And even to that point, I would say there's probably a little bit more production value in their post-race and pre-race celebrations and stuff like that. So let's talk a little bit about the charters because that seems to be the big sticking point with the teams right now. I mean, Michael obviously raised a lot of specific concerns. One thing that the team owners in their meetings that Marshall Pruitt talked about specifically talked about the idea that maybe Liberty could buy the series. That I can confirm with you has definitely taken place. Liberty has reached out at least 3 times to try to buy the series. And as reported by other outlets, apparently Roger on the 3rd inquiry essentially told them to F off in probably no uncertain terms. The specifics of these meetings that the team owners have been doing, according to Marshall Pruitt, is that there were 2 meetings held in February. There was a 6-team meeting early on in February, and then a later meeting that included all 10 teams. However, in the second meeting, Michael Andretti and Dan Tauris did not attend. They had Rob Edwards attend in their stead. So that's very curious with the current article that came out of the Indy Star. Who's attending that meeting, who's looking at who's taking that seriously, or maybe who's not taking that meeting seriously, right? Now, I think the final part of this all is that Chip Ganassi seems like one of Roger Penske's biggest supporters. In the press conference yesterday, which I asked specifically about locked-in spots at Indy 500 to Chip Ganassi, which he said he would favor a promoter's option like CART, which is interesting because I can't remember the last time CART used a promoter's option. I'm pretty sure that would have been back in the late 80s, maybe the early 90s at the latest. So you're talking almost 35 years ago when the promoter's option was ever even a thing. I don't know. I don't know what we're talking about there. I think the locked-in spots, I mean, you guys know me very well at this point. Locked-in spots at the Indy 500 should absolutely not happen in any case. But at that press conference, Chip Ganassi specifically mentioned that he's bullish on the future of the series, supports the series, reiterated that in an Indy Star article that was also written by Nathan Brown, essentially saying, hey, he saved us from COVID. Well, I think that is definitely a point that, yes, Roger Penske did do that. Objectively, he did do that. I think it's also important to note that we're talking about something that happened 4 years ago. And I get it. We're an IndyCar series that remembers 1996 like it was the Alamo, right? Like, we still blame the split for all of IndyCar's problems, and I guess we're going to continue to blame COVID for all its problems. I mean, at some point, you go into the restaurant and they're still making you, stand 6 feet apart 4 years later. Maybe it's the restaurant's fault, not COVID's fault, right? So, yes, I think Chip does have a point, but does he have a point in 2024 about talking about the problems of 2024 by bringing up the problems of 2020? I don't know. That's a bit of a head scratcher to me, but I think there's a lot of turmoil right now. I'm very curious about where things are going to go. Certainly, we're going to continue to stay on top of it, but I kind of feel a lot of the same feelings that I felt in December, and here we are on really the second day of school now, the first race of the season. And a lot of the, I think I said this a couple videos ago, the problems that exist have not stopped existing. And now, as the problem continues to roll down the hill, you're seeing more and more people willing to speak out against it publicly. Now, finally, I guess the final point I'll make is, do I think this is going to lead to some sort of a split? No. There isn't a series out there right now. Until Michael Andretti starts his own series or Liberty Media starts their own series, there won't be a split. But I think that having unhappy team owners, having unhappy fans, having unhappy manufacturers, there's a lot of things that are going to need to be addressed pretty quickly here, and the longer they don't go addressed, the greater and greater these problems and the louder the voices are going to get. I don't think we've heard the last of any of this stuff, and obviously we'll talk about it when it breaks. So thank you guys so much for watching. Qualifying report later on today, and we'll see you in the next video.